Dear wildling, I need your help. We create the Wild podcast with great care and a lot of love. I consciously choose to keep these conversations free and accessible to everyone. But only with your support can the Wild podcast continue to exist. With your donation, even if it's just €2 for every episode you listen to, you help to make it possible to keep this work going. Together, we can continue to build open, honest, and inspiring conversations. You'll find more information in the show notes or on the website. From the bottom of my heart, thank you ever so much. Welcome to Wild, the podcast for wildlings just like you. Wildlings who want to transform the prevalent plant blindness to collective plant wisdom. My name is Lieve Galle. I've been working as a herbalist and wild plant forager in Belgium since 2002. In those years, I've seen a lot of changes. Working with plants has become more popular, but I've also seen time is running out for our planet. As foragers and herbalists in Europe, sometimes we're dealing with different plant species and different cultural approaches towards plants. In some countries, working with plants is licensed, and in others, it's almost illegal. I believe that together we can learn from one another and be stronger. There is nothing more empowering than connecting wild souls. Together, we can have a greater impact on restoring the ancient link between people and plants. And that's why, for this podcast series, I'm talking to fellow herbalists and foragers in Europe. So if you're ready to find out what you've never been told, but what your soul already knows, welcome to Wild. Hello, wildling. This is the second episode in a 3-part series that was recorded at the annual meetup of the Association of Foragers. And if you haven't listened to the previous episode yet, with 5 guests, you are missing out. In this episode, I have a conversation with Liam O'Brien from Walking Pace Only. Liam is a foraging educator, mushroom hunter, and whisperer of the wild. Enjoy. Liam, how long have you been a member?
I only became a member in December 2024, so just in time to join the last meetup in January or February last year. So yeah, I still feel very fresh to the association.
And what is your favorite memory of an annual meetup of the AOF so far?
Well, last year it was my first one, and it was quite overwhelming meeting all of these people that I've been following on social media and learning from and reading their books, and to sort of have everybody in the same room was a bit overwhelming. But I think that's quite a common experience, and everyone's so friendly and open and warm, and it was just very relaxing to sort of get over those initial nerves. And yeah, one of the things that I brought to last year's meetup was a song that I'd sort of written. I'm not a singer, but in my community, we have resurrected the wassail, this sort of annual tradition where we sing to the apple trees for a good harvest, and we all get together in the middle of winter and get dressed up and light flaming torches and sing songs. And it was really nice to be able to bring that song and sort of, sing that with other foragers and other musicians that are AOF members. So that was a really nice intro.
Yes, it's really nice to revive those traditions because they were there and they were about communicating with the land and connecting with the land. And I think they're so important in today's world to revive these things.
Yeah, so when I moved from, I lived in London for 11 years and then moved to the countryside in Dorset, where this small village has 3 orchards. And some people had already resurrected the apple day of getting together in the autumn and as a community picking the apples and juicing the apples and making apple juice for everyone to take away. But this was very recently revived, only maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And as that grew in size, and then somebody gave us a press and a barrel, and we filled it with juice and made our own cider. And the apple day grew into we need a wassail, you know. They sort of go hand in hand with the harvesting as a community, and then the celebrating and connecting with the trees in the winter. And there's this wonderful cycle where you all get together to drink the juice and drink the cider and celebrate nature in that way. And it just grows and grows. There's a lot of creativity behind the costumes and the songs. We've been written our own songs as a community, and people have brought their own songs and their own poems and their own sort of adding to the ceremony year on year. It sort of builds and people take more ownership and more connection, and the children grow up with this example of how we can celebrate nature in that way. Yeah, it's really wonderful to see.
That's impressive. And the nice thing about it is it's also a lot of fun to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, so many people are quite depressed in January. You know, the busyness of the sort of Christmas period is over, and it's cold and it's miserable in England most of the time. But to have something to look forward to at the end of January, and we get together and sort of practice the songs every Sunday in January leading up to the wassail. So it's just, it really invigorates people and gives them something to look forward to. And it doesn't feel like a really miserable time of the year anymore. It feels joyous. And, you know, you're seeing through those coldest, darkest times and coming out the other side, looking forward to the spring. Yeah.
So how long have you been a forager, and how did it all get started for you?
Yeah, well, even though I've got a very Irish name, I grew up in Australia, and my parents had just moved there from South Africa right before I was born. But my great-grandfather was Irish and moved to South Africa, I don't know, over 100 years ago. And my mum's mum was English and her dad was Dutch and her grandmother was French. But I grew up in a part of the world where it was it was totally new environment in terms of the Australian bush and the landscape. And we spent a lot of time camping and connecting with nature, but I didn't know anything about wild food. I felt very comfortable being out in nature and in the wilderness and hiking and camping. And the Australian landscape is quite harsh and hot and spiky and bitey. But I felt really comfortable, and I knew all the names of the birds that would visit the garden, and I knew the names of some of the flowers and things, but that was as far as it went. And then when I came to England in my 20s in 2007, it was like a whole new world, you know, new plants, new birds, new berries. And I started off when I got together with my wife, who is English and who grew up in Somerset and had a lot of plant knowledge and tree knowledge just from growing up in a valley, and her parents had a small holding, so she was very connected to growing veg, and her parents raised animals, and she was sort of had this very idyllic childhood. But I was sort of constantly asking her questions. Oh, what's that called? What's this called? What's that called? And when I exhausted her knowledge, she bought me some books. So I started learning about, the birds and the plants and the wildflowers and the mushrooms, and just slowly built up that knowledge and started off on all the same basic things like picking blackberries and picking wild garlic and making sloe gin. So that was probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. So, but I feel like a little kid, like I'd never had any snow in Western Australia. So to have snow in London and to snow in the countryside and just to experience all these things for the first time as an adult was quite exciting. It really brought out the kid in me. And then, sort of had children in London, then eventually had this opportunity to move away from London and to move to the countryside. And that was in 2018. And then when the COVID pandemic broke out and was working from home, it was an amazing excuse to spend as much time as possible going out into the landscape around the village and to visit the woods and to visit the fields. And I said, right, I'm going to spend as much time possible learning every corner of every field and where things grow, and just deepening that knowledge and deepening that journey of foraging, and getting to know the names of all the plants and the herbs and the birds and the trees. There's some amazing old oak trees and beech trees, and yeah. And I guess, it was probably only in 2020 that I picked my first mushroom. It was a birch polypore to make medicinal mushroom tea. And I learned all the basic kind of turkey tail and scarlet elf cups and some of the mushrooms that are quite distinct winter mushrooms that are hard to confuse for anything else. But then I guess because I already had a bit of experience with plant foraging, I very quickly went down the rabbit hole of fungi and mushrooms, and started teaching foraging walks in 2022 and started teaching mushrooms in 2023. And it was quite, I had a lot of people say to me, wow, you didn't grow up with any parents or grandparents, haven't absorbed any knowledge from family or from relatives. A lot of it was from books, and then from Facebook groups and from Instagram, and following other foraging teachers, a lot of who were in the association, who I got to meet and learn from. But I realized I've got one of those brains where I have a bit of a photographic memory and have very good pattern recognition, and these are things that I had sort of noticed in other parts of my life, but getting into foraging was like, oh, this is what my brain is for. This is why I can remember all of the facts and the names and recognize things. It's been an interesting kind of circle journey of learning a lot in a short amount of time, and then being able to repeat that and teach people and remember all of those details.
Yeah, and I think it says a little bit about the blueprint in our DNA or in our brains that we are really designed to forage. If you think about, this is how we evolved as foraging humans. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. And I remember one of my students, she used to be a shopaholic, and she said, once I started foraging, I never went shopping again, like for clothes or anything, because I found out the source of my behavior. I actually wanted to go out foraging, but I didn't know there was such a thing. So I went to stores all the time to buy new clothing that I didn't need, or buy new stuff that I didn't need. And I thought that was so beautiful that she really felt this urge, and she had this behavior, and then she started foraging, and the light bulb just went on in her head, and she said, oh, this is why I've been doing what I'm doing. And it's also like on a subconscious level, sometimes we feel this emptiness if we're not even aware of it, but we feel just so empty when we don't have this connection to nature. And once it is filled, we're not going to fill it up anymore by consumerism.
Yeah. When I look back at my childhood, so when I was really young, maybe 4 or 5, I was learning to read already, and I guess maybe I taught myself to read. I went to a Montessori kindergarten where you were encouraged to do whatever you wanted. And so I spent all my time reading and drawing and going out into nature. And I remember going on a hike with my parents. And, for my dad, who had only been in the country for 4 or 5 years, everything was new to him. And we went on this walk up a mountain, and I was there as a 4-year-old pointing out flowers. Oh, this is Geraldton wax, and this is this. And I knew the names of these wildflowers, and he was blown away. He was like, well, how do you know this? Because I was reading books and seeing pictures and remembering the names and then spotting them in the wild. And I had that sort of skill baked in at that age. But then, growing up in the 80s, it was that era with all the cartoons were ads for toys, and I have a technical brain. Like, in school, I was doing double maths and double science and on track to be an engineer. But I also had this creative pull and loved fine art and loved color, and sort of ended up studying architecture and then discovering product design. And I became a product designer and have had a career of 20-something years working in product design and product development, which is a really creatively fulfilling job. But at the same time, I was so disconnected from nature. I'd lost track of this initial love. And I really loved toy design. And when I was studying product design, I started collecting Transformers toys as an adult, in my 20s. And when I started working and had more disposable income, I just started collecting and collecting and collecting. And I had this huge collection of hundreds of Transformers toys in this whole wall of my room, in my 20s. And I would go out on a Saturday and I would drive to the nearest shopping mall and I would visit the 3 department stores that I knew had toy sections. And I hated shopping malls and I hated how busy they were and I hated the people and the lights, but I would go there anyway and I would see, has anything new appeared on the shelf that's been restocked? And then if I found something, there was that real excitement. And the Transformers collectors would call it the thrill of the hunt. You're out there hunting for these things. You don't know when they're going to appear. And you would then find something new and take it back and get on the internet, on the chat rooms, and you would tell people, I've just found this, there's a new shipment, and other people would then go out and go to the same place to find these new toys. And, that was just it seemed like kind of a normal sort of thing to do as part of this hobby. And it's only years later, getting into foraging, that it's like, oh, that is foraging behavior, It is baked in. We are hunter-gatherers, and that dopamine hit that you get from discovering a new patch of mushrooms or, like harvesting berries. But it's so much more fulfilling when it's food and medicine and connecting with nature in that way and knowing that there is a living mycelium that you can revisit in that place, even if it doesn't fruit every year, it's there and you're connected and you remember it. And that real embodied knowledge and embodied connection and the way that you build up that relationship with a woodland or a wild space or a river or a tree. And, after repeat visits, the kind of relationship that builds up is so much more fulfilling than a shelf of toys, But yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people who have these same urges and have these same minds who are totally stuck in this capitalist world, that they maybe don't realize what they could be getting from foraging or from nature connection. And they're still stuck in that sort of old paradigm of capitalism. And it's like, if you just reskill or, pick a new hobby that's going to be better for your mental health, better for your physical health. And if you've got that inquiring mind and that sort of, foraging behavior, that's foraging will tick all those boxes. That's what it's for,
Yeah, and also I think foraging is an invitation to slow down. And, capitalism really wants us to live in this rat race and hustle culture and, fast pace of life. And yeah, the slowing down, once you get into that, you start to see so many new things. And I think especially we've touched that a little bit, like neurospiciness is like a big advantage as a forager. Like I remember with my son, we were in Germany at a very large railway station. And we were just on the platform. We had been traveling for hours. We were tired. And I was a bit overwhelmed because there was a lot of noise. It was, a lot of people there. But he was like, look, do you see in the wall of the platform, there's a little mouse living there. Do you see it, Mom? And I was like so excited. And I thought, wow, he has seen that and nobody on the platform could see that. So, and I think, neurodiversity, neurospiciness, as we like to call it, is such an advantage as a forager because, one, you're in an environment where you do not get overwhelmed. That's one thing. But the other thing is you see the patterns and you see and I just love that.
Yeah. And that's been another really interesting part of the journey. I lived in London for 11 years working in design, and London is so oppressive and overwhelming and overstimulating and busy and noisy and smelly and all the toxins and the pollutants. And it's so but I was obliviously, just hedonistically enjoying all of the food and the music and the parties but I was also working in a job where, as a designer, you're sat at a computer, really focusing and hyper focusing on the work. And I was developing chronic back pain, and I was stressed. And for me, leaving London and moving to the countryside, that real lesson of slowing down and spending more time in nature. It's like, this is so soothing for my nervous system. And it's so important, especially because, I identify as both autistic and ADHD, not diagnosed. And, I didn't struggle with school. If anything, it was an advantage having advanced pattern recognition and a very mathematical brain. Like every maths or science was just a new problem to solve. I love puzzles. I love, I have my brain just runs away wanting to make sense and sort of categorize and order things. So if anything, I feel like it was an advantage for me in my career. But then there was reaching this point where I was disconnected from my body. I was always stuck in my head. I was neglecting my body, its needs, and the chronic pain that kind of creeps in from not listening to those signals or not sensing those signals because you're just focused on something else. So foraging and spending so much more time out in nature. Like every spare hour that I have now, I'm just out in the woods and out in the fields. And it's so healing and so nourishing. And that sort of, just realizing how we need that balance in our lives. And when I started posting on Instagram, even before I started teaching foraging, I called my Instagram walking pace only, because I realized I've been living this hectic, busy life and I needed to slow down. And I've always been someone that notices those details. I would have been like your son, spotting the, flowers growing in the cracks in the pavement and spotting things. I used to take a lot of photos, and now I don't take so many photos, but I do spend a lot of time just absorbed with those details and noticing those details. And it's so nice when you take people out on a foraging walk and you show them, if you slow down and start paying attention rather than this green wall of plants, you're starting to recognize individual species and individual characters. And you recognize plants as living beings with their gifts that they have to offer and their flavor and their medicine. And you're building on that sort of relationship. And you can't get that if you're rushing past, and you can't get that if you're distracted. You sort of have to get out of your head and be mindful and put your phone away and just take it all in. I love that.
I think I found it really interesting to see, like, in a whole group of foragers, how neurodiversity really is more the norm than the exception. And I also think that neurodiverse people really are the canaries in the coal mine at the moment, because they are the first ones to experience, unfortunately, burnouts and things like that. But it's, as a whole society, we've gone so mad and so fast, and so everything has to be faster and better and bigger all the time. And it's so different than in nature, because nature, it's like this linear thinking, and nature has this cyclic thinking that is completely different. And it's interesting to see what is happening there in the field.
So as I said before, the neurodivergence in my family was totally undiagnosed. And I have two children. My daughter is sort of 10 and a half, and my son is 9. And when my son, when the COVID pandemic hit, he was about 3, at a very formative age. And all of the extra anxiety and stress of that time suddenly manifested it in sort of quite extreme behavior and upsets and meltdowns. And in us trying to learn what was going on for him, we started learning about autism and ADHD. He seemed more obviously ADHD at first, but then it also has the layers of autism and overwhelm and meltdown. And, when he goes into fight or flight, he goes into fight. And when I was a kid, when I went into fight and flight, I would shut down and go quiet. But it was the same sensory overwhelm manifesting in a very different way. But he got to year 1, and in the English school system, there is, even just the basic structure of, okay, well, now we stop and we move on and we do the next thing, and we stop and we do the next thing. He couldn't handle that, in reception year, where you're able to just play and be self-guided, he was fine. But he just couldn't handle the school system, and he started refusing to go to school. He was so stressed. He was so upset. His self-esteem plummeted. And we had to really stop and think, like, wait a minute, just because we had my wife and I had an okay time at school, like we really had to question the whole thing. And in the end, after doing a lot of research, we pulled him out and started home educating him. My daughter stayed at school until just November, just a few months ago, where she also said, I think I've had enough of school. I could see so many issues. She was very articulate in her letter that she wrote to the school explaining all of the things, but she just that pressure to conform and all of the rules, and they're teaching them at a younger and younger age, like all of this pressure and marks and results, and it's just too much. And she could see that our friends in the home ed community, the children are less stressed, are more creative, are more, able to follow their own interests, and are more sort of happy with themselves and without trying to conform to some standard of normality. So it's really exciting now that both kids are in home education, and there are lots of other people choosing that in the UK and like probably in Europe.
In Belgium as well.
Yeah, it's growing because, as you say, even just in one generation, the school system and the pressure and the overstimulation is becoming way more apparent for the children who are sensitive and neurospicy and oversensitive. There's a lot of people that are choosing home ed for that reason. Sometimes people who had a difficult time at school themselves have just never put their kids in school because they realize these children are going to struggle like I struggled. And, choosing a more nurturing environment where they can spend more time in nature, they can spend more time learning through play and learning through story and learning through doing. And it's so exciting to see that different style of learning and just how engaged with learning they are. And it's, we're living in a society that has gone too far in so many ways. And it's this interesting moment of recalibrating and questioning everything, questioning the norms and the expectations and thinking, how can we do this differently? How can we go backwards? And as you say, like if you go back far enough to when people lived in tribes and lived in villages all over Europe, there would have been the people that had those sort of sensitivities and those memories and those abilities and the pattern recognition, they would have been the foragers, they would have been the healers, they would have been the medicine people. And not everyone has the capacity to hold all of that information or that recognition. But, you don't need everyone in the village to do that. You would have the foragers who would go out and find a patch and then say, great, it's time to harvest. And then they would go and harvest as a community. And, we would have played such an important role in those tribes and those villages and those communities. And yeah, I think it's good to be reminded about that every community needs people with this knowledge. And if we can nurture that in the new generation and teach that plant knowledge and medicine for the next generation, they're going to protect nature and care about nature in a way that's so needed in the current climate crisis and ecological crisis.
Absolutely. How do you see the whole thing, like foraging, herbal medicine, how do you see it evolving over the next few decades? Do you think, because I remember I've been doing this for almost 25 years now, and I can definitely see the increase in interest, especially after COVID, because the only thing people were allowed to do was just going out for a walk. So that's what they did. And I suddenly realized, oh, we make these trips to the other side of the world, but we don't even know what's growing around us locally. And so, yeah, I can definitely see it growing, but I just want to know, how do you see it in the next few decades evolving?
Yeah, I hope that the people who are still living in the kind of mainstream society culture find ways of getting out into nature and connecting with nature more. Yeah, there are so many hobbies that are just feeding capitalism, and if we can kind of break out of that mentality and connect with what's right on our doorstep and that surrounds us, and I see the same thing, that there are a lot of people who are starting to question that and wanting to spend a bit more time out there connecting. I hope it continues to grow and deepen. And I hope that the interest in foraging kind of continues. You do get people that come back on my foraging walks like season after season and year after year. And they want to go deeper and they want to explore more and they want to have long conversations that you can't fit into a 3 or 4 hour walk. So, yeah, I'm hoping to do some longer full day workshops. And I know there's so many foragers, the teachers as part of the association who are doing really interesting work with, like a course that runs over a year of different weekends, or people kind of committing to come back and join these longer sessions and camping trips and sort of, just reconnect in that deeper way.
Yeah, I can recommend that. I have my own foraging course that is like 1 year course. And I still love doing it because one, you get to connect a lot better with the group of people that you're teaching. But also I found that when I had a group that was just coming like for one session, one workshop, I know that the things they remember, it's just like fragments. So I would avoid the plants that were not like unconditionally edible, like the ones that you had to cook first or that you have to pick before they start to flower or things like that. And I really wanted to be able to tell the whole story, not just parts of it. So, and that's been really very interesting. And also I've been learning myself a lot from my students because they ask deeper questions, and that makes you a better teacher because sometimes you don't know the answer and you think, okay, that's a really good question. I need to find out more information about this. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I at the start of all of my walks, I remind people I'm Australian. I've only been in this country 18 years. You've all got knowledge that you picked up from your grandparents and your parents, and just from living in this environment, And I always pick up new little bits of information from people, from things they remember from their childhood, or that they remember from relatives. So it's nice. I'm always open to learning new wisdom in that way.
Yes, and I'm really hopeful for the next decades that people will see and experience how important all of this knowledge is, because sometimes I have my moments of sadness when I feel like a wave of sadness coming over me because I think so many of these foraging and herbal traditions have been going extinct for the past generations, and maybe some of them are lost forever. And it is really giving me this very deep sense of sadness. But then I think, yeah, we just have to continue what we're doing and spreading the word and inspiring people.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe I'm an example of someone that was totally lost in my family and my ancestry for more than 100 years, but I've come back and found it and reconnected with it. And I'm so passionate about sharing that. Every time I walk with anyone, it turns into a foraging walk, pointing things out and sharing knowledge and nibbling on things. And I think if we just show people how accessible it is and how easy it is to access and connect with the plants and fungi around us, that will inspire people to get connected. And the younger, I love having children on my walks, and I'm always encouraging people to sort of bring their kids and I love teaching kids because the ones that are engaged are so engaged and they're so switched on and they're noticing all of the little details. They're such good mushroom hunters, and to get that sort of excitement and passion sort of bedded in from a young age, I think is really key to turning the tide into reconnecting people in that way.
Yeah, and children are really interesting. I remember one walk that I did for actually for some friends, and yeah, it was a group of adults and they all had their kids with them, but the kids were like, playing a little bit hide and seek and some other things while I was just doing the walk with the parents. And I thought, okay, well, they just play, it's okay. But at the end of the walk, they were like, hey, here is another red clover. And so they still picked it up. And I think that is so, because children are like sponges, really. And I remember with my children, I always wanted to, so they are 16 now, they're teenagers. And what I found so interesting, I always thought, yeah, but okay, I'm the herbalist, I'm the forager, but maybe they don't even think it's remotely interesting what I have to say about that. So I never explicitly taught them anything about plants, nothing at all. But I just, I went out, I picked it, I prepared it, I made some medicine with it, and they were there. They were in my environment, and they picked it all up. And now, as a teenagers, I go on walks with them, and we just have a little chat, and then suddenly I point to like the mugwort, and I say, okay, what plant is that, and how can you use it? And they know everything, and I'm so impressed because I never explicitly taught them anything, and they still picked it up. You just have to live your life, and they will pick it up.
Yeah, I see that with my children as well. Like, neither of them really has the patience to come along on a full foraging walk. Sometimes in the last mushroom season, I was able to convince my son to come out because he loves the treasure hunt aspect of it. You never know what you're going to find. But yeah, their level of plant and mushroom knowledge is amazing compared to the other children their age. And that's just from being around me and hearing the conversations and yeah, remembering and recognizing in the same way. And I hope that one day they'll be up for coming on longer forages. But again, just normalizing. So I make a lot of preserves, and I make a lot of liqueurs, and I'm always drying mushrooms and drying herbs, and we've got like a big wall of herbal teas that we've foraged for ourselves, and just normalizing that like, why buy for herbal tea if you can forage it yourself? Why buy like ketchup and pickled things when you can make them yourself? You know, I'd love to get to the point where I never need to buy any sauces or preserves or pickles, and it's all homemade. And just to normalize that for people, that in terms of people who are conscious of their impact from like a carbon footprint point of view, and wanting to be more conscious about where they buy their products from. You know, you can either support local producers who are making stuff out of local ingredients, or you can start doing it yourself. And a lot of people say, oh, I don't have the time to process things and make things. It doesn't take that long to make a couple of bottles of elderberry syrup, you know, which is amazing medicine to get you through the winter and fight off colds and flus, you know. And I love the crossover between delicious flavor and medicine. You know, even the liqueurs that I make, it's a tincture that has a little bit of extra sugar. You're still getting all the medicinal benefit as long as you drink it in moderation and you treat it more like a medicine. And yeah, just I guess, yeah, again, there's that thing of the hobby and how you're spending your time. I'd rather spend my time out picking and then making things in the kitchen, because then you get that sense of satisfaction and you get wild flavors that you can't buy in a shop. And to be able to share that with people that come around for dinner and to give gifts of things that I've made, it's just so fulfilling. And yeah, and then, you know, anything that you're able to pick from the hedgerow and make yourself, you're not having to buy from a store. You're not supporting that insane trade of products that is so energy intensive, getting shipped around the world from place to place. If you can just get more local and yeah, create food and support food that's coming from local farms and local producers, I think that's a really exciting part of the future. And as more farms convert to organic, you've got these huge organic farms where in England the hedgerows are brimming with berries. They haven't had any pollutants or toxins or glyphosates sprayed for so long. You know, you're able to go and forage in the neglected spaces of farms, and as long as you're doing it in a sustainable way and leaving enough for the wildlife and for the animals and for the insects, you know, there's all of this amazing produce, wild produce that's there to be turned into food and medicine and sustenance. And I think that's a really exciting thing that I want to look into a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, and about the not having time, I think a lot of people, if they're really honest with themselves, spend a lot of time doom scrolling. And I think, yeah, maybe your hands don't want to swipe and scroll all the time. Maybe they just want to be peeling chestnuts and acorns and you know, selecting seeds and things like that.
Yeah, it's a much more mindful activity. And a lot of the time when people are doom scrolling, they're chasing that dopamine hit. They're feeling low, they're feeling stressed, they're feeling tired for whatever reason, and they're looking for a little pick-me-up. Stepping outside and picking some plants or nibbling on a berry, or yeah, working with your hands to process a harvest is so much more fulfilling. And it takes you into that flow state. You know, again, humanity has evolved processing things together, cooking together, making handicrafts together. You know, working with our hands and getting out of our heads and engaging is so important. It's so nourishing for us. Yeah, that flow state that you can achieve through foraging and making is soothing and healing.
Yeah, it's like I'm not the kind of person who just goes sit in a quiet corner and meditate, but I feel like I'm doing a lot of meditative stuff while foraging and also while I'm processing everything that I've picked because it's repetitive work. And also, yeah, like when you walk around and all your senses are open to find exactly what you're looking for. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's when people realize the benefits that they can get for their own health and their mental health, it's like, what would you rather be doing with your time? Maybe you reevaluate where you're spending your time and what you're getting from it.
Yeah, and I love how you say, let's just normalize it. Let's normalize foraging and normalize having this knowledge. And I can see this now with my children. Ever since they were small, they found it very strange that people would get stung by stinging nettle and they would not know what to do. They would, and they were like, come on, there's plantain here, there's ground ivy here, there's so many things you can do. And they would come to me, like, even as toddlers, and say, why are people so helpless? They are in nature. And it's just very normal for them to have this knowledge. And I think it's great to grow up like that, and because it's part of who we are as a human, really.
Yeah.
We coexist. We don't just exist on our own. And I found that sometimes new students come to me and they say, oh, I'm so disconnected from nature. And then I'm like, yeah, but you breathe, right? I mean, that's an exchange with plants and phytoplankton, the oxygen, and you're not probably not thinking about it, but you are already part of nature. Without nature, you don't survive. It's not like a thing that is outside of you. It's just your inherent part of it.
Yeah. It's a really good reminder. So I was just hanging out in the woods with my kids and some other home ed friends last week, and my son fell over in the woods and stung himself on stinging nettles, which are all the really fresh, young, early stinging nettles, which really hurt, big welts on his wrist. And I said, okay, let's look for some plantain. And I know in those woods that we won't find any plantain in those woods, but maybe if we go to the track on the edge where the ground is a bit more compact, there'll be some plantain. But I haven't seen any. It's still quite early. It's still the middle of winter. We're getting a lot of spring plants and herbs coming up early in England. It's really unsettling how early everything is coming at the moment. And I couldn't find any plant. He said, oh, there's loads of dock leaves. And I've taught them, dock leaves are useless, like they're a placebo. And he was like, what about the other bit, And I was like, oh, he's just reminded me that I've taught him this knowledge and I'd forgotten it out of season. But, if you find a young dock leaf and there's the sheath and you can peel open the sheath and there's like an aloe vera gel. So we found a load of these and he stuck them on his arm, and within a few minutes he was like, this feels better now. And it was like, I'd forgotten that bit of knowledge. I always, at the start of every spring, I have to sort of feel a bit rusty, but to be reminded by my own son of like, what about that other thing you said? I'm like, oh, yeah, thank you. It's nice.
That's great. I remember one time I was working in the kitchen and I really had a really bad cut on my finger that was just bleeding massively, as fingers can bleed. And they were just going out and finding the herb Robert to just crush it and put it on. And I thought, wow, it's really in their system. They remember.
Yeah, and it's nice when that sort of stuff trickles up. I had a similar thing where I had a thorn in my foot that wouldn't heal. It had kind of got right under the hard skin, and I had this really painful foot, and I had a thing coming up on the weekend where I needed to walk a lot, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And then I was like, hang on a minute, yarrow is really good for this. I remember another herbalist mentioning how good yarrow is, not only at disinfecting a cut, but drawing out splinters. So I went to the garden, found some yarrow, made a poultice, stuck it on the bottom of my foot, and like all of the pain and the inflammation and the swelling went away within 24 hours. And I changed it a few times, and it was amazing. And it pulled the splinter out, and it was like, oh yeah, just remembering those little nuggets of information and taking that, like empowering that we should be turning to herbs for most little day-to-day issues and for most little day-to-day illnesses. And I know you've said this on the podcast, and some of the people you've spoken to, obviously with some issues, health issues, pharmaceuticals are really effective, but we should be like turning to the plants first and turning to the herbs and using them more often and normalizing that, in a first aid and a health and a tea kind of way.
Yeah, and also because that again changes your relationship to that particular plant. Like, it's no longer just a plant in a landscape. It is like a friend that really supported you when you needed it, right? It's, yeah, it helped you heal a cut or a burning wound or a cold or whatever. And that just, it's on a whole different level then that you're interacting with the plants and that you're looking at the plants. I find it that it is like that for me.
Yeah, like you say, we are part of nature. Mother Nature provides. We have everything we need. We've got so much to learn from sort of indigenous cultures who have still kept that sort of knowledge and wisdom alive. But it's good to remind ourselves that if you go back far enough, we are all from tribal societies that were living sustainably in harmony with nature. And there's been a lot of disconnect and rupture and trauma over the history of the modern world and and of Europe. But we can relearn and we can reconnect. And yeah, I would just love for more of this stuff to be more widespread and more day to day. And I think, yeah, it is a part of healing this kind of messed up society that's gone a bit too far. And if we just take a few steps back and slow down and reconnect, yeah, everything will work out.
That's a beautiful end of our conversation. Thank you so much, Liam. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
A warm thank you for listening, Wildie. Are you feeling a wild itch after this episode? Well, just head over to wildplantforager.com and feel free to connect with me on social media. I'm looking forward to the next episode. I hope you'll be there. But for now, just go outside and follow your wild heart. Hi, Wildling. Hey, I'm still looking for some more interesting guests on European herbalism and foraging. So if you know anybody that would want to be a guest in my podcast series, please feel free to reach out and contact me through social media, Wild Plant Forager, or through my website, wildplantforager.com. Thank you so much.